Good morning and welcome to Virtual Worship with Community Unitarian Universalist Congregation. I'm Reverend Meredith Garmon, minister of this congregation, coming to you from our congregation's sanctuary.
I'm Tracy Brenneman, Community UU religious educator, coming to you from my home in Westchester County.
I'm Adam Kent, CUUC's music director here at my home in Manhattan.
Welcome to this home of religious liberalism. What makes religion liberal is these 5 shared values and understandings.
1, learning. Revelation is continuous. Meaning has not been fully captured. Nothing is complete, and thus nothing is exempt from criticism.
2, freedom. All relations must rest on free consent. Because coercions may be subtle, the work of detecting and removing them is ongoing.
3, justice. We are morally obligated to direct our efforts toward the establishment of a just and loving community. Hence, the voice of the prophet is central and indispensable.
4, institution building. We cannot become whole nor advance learning, freedom, and justice without good institutions.
And 5, hope. Things could get better. There's no guarantee they will, but through our efforts, they really might.
Today is the 8th Sunday of autumn, and the new moon began this morning.
We had unseasonable warmth this week for mid-November. Monday through Thursday, temperatures were at a level that's average for September.
To all our visitors, welcome. If you're a first-time attendee and comfortable doing so, we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat.
The chat is also for reporting any technical issues. When you send a chat, check to make sure you are sending to all panelists and attendees, and not just to panelists, so everyone will see your message.
If you are visiting us this morning, you'll find our order of service on our website at cuucwp.org, along with resources to help keep us connected during this time.
If your audio isn't working well, you can listen to the service by calling in by phone. The number is in that order of service on our website.
We have a number of ways you can support and care for our community. In November, our plate share funds will go to the food pantry. We're able to take contributions via PayPal for your pledge, the plate share, and minister's discretionary fund. Find the donate button on our website at cuucwp.org.
Thank you for bringing your bright presence this morning. Across the distance and through the screens between us, each of us helps all our lights to shine.
On the 8th Sunday of each season, as we light our chalice, we dedicate it to the first source of the living tradition we share, direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces that create and uphold life.
Hi, I'm Joe Majak. As the chair of the board for this congregation, I welcome you. Did you know CUUC is moving forward with building renovations? As we nurture each other in our spiritual journeys, we will ensure comfortable access to our building space for everyone, within and beyond our community, as our mission statement goes. With COVID-19 restrictions in place, this is a good opportunity to make improvements in the building while it is essentially shut down, except for a handful of cautiously approved activities. We have received 3 bids for the renovation of every bathroom in our congregational building. The 2 bathrooms adjacent to the office will be expanded in order to be ADA compliant. The bids came in a bit higher than expected. The building committee requested permission to instruct our architect to request building permits from the White Plains Building Department. The estimated cost is about $200,000 to $215,000. The funds will be withdrawn from the building fund with a transfer of additional funds from the endowment fund. Our finance committee and treasurer had previously allocated those additional funds in anticipation of just such a request. A motion to authorize the building committee to move forward to the next phase and approve a budget of $215,000 for the project was made and unanimously approved by the Board of Trustees in their most recent meeting. Now it's time to light our chalice. I invite you to light your chalice along with me as I light mine. This is the mission of our faith: to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness to all that we must hold the whole world in our hands.
King John Sigismund's rule of Transylvania began in 1559 when his mother, Isabella, died. He was 19. John, like his mother, was unusually interested in religion, both as a tool of statecraft and from a genuine interest in discerning the truth for its own sake. Born and raised Catholic, John converted to Lutheranism at age 22. At age 24, John switched to Calvinism and appointed Ferenc David as court preacher. David and Giorgio Biandrata, John's physician and trusted counselor, now at court together, began collaborating in the development of the two ideas that would be central to Unitarianism: criticizing Trinitarianism, including rejecting the deity of Jesus Christ, and upholding religious toleration. King John's fascination with religious questions led him to organize a series of theological debates. There was the 1566 Synod at Gyulafehérvár, the first open or public debate of Trinitarianism, with Biandrata and David defending the anti-position. Biandrata shrewdly stipulated that the only authority for the debate could be Scripture, not doctrine, dogma, or philosophy. This put the Trinitarian side at quite a disadvantage, since the Trinity idea is not in the Bible and only appears with the 325 Council of Nicaea. While the appointed auditors ruled the debate inconclusive, the king liked what he heard from Biandrata and David and provided them with a press with which to publish Unitarian ideas to a wider audience. The next year, 1567, Biandrata and David co-authored False and True Knowledge of God, echoing Miguel Serveto's points. Repeatedly, they insisted that Christ and the apostles held a simple and straightforward doctrine, which was corrupted by philosophical sophistry epitomized by Trinitarianism. By the end of 1567, King John was persuaded. He, along with Biandrata and David, were now anti-Trinitarians, though there wasn't yet a Unitarian denomination. That would come in 1568 with the Edict of Torda.
Thank you, Meredith. And speaking of history, a kid comes home from his first music history class at school, and his parents asked him what he learned. And he says, I learned that Johann Sebastian Bach had 20 kids and that he practiced on a spinster in the attic. Bach came from a family that had been connected to the music business for over a century before his birth. And in fact, at least 4 of his sons would become distinguished musicians and composers in their own right. Wilhelm Friedemann Bach, the eldest, seemed to be something of a favorite. You heard during the gathering music some two-part inventions, which are teaching pieces Johann Sebastian wrote for his oldest son, and I'll be playing more later in the service today. Wilhelm Friedemann had a younger brother, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, and one can only wonder about the sibling rivalry between the two of them. Carl Philipp Emanuel also went on to become a distinguished composer, a musician in the court of Frederick the Great. He tended, though, to look back at his father's music as somewhat old-fashioned and out of date. And I'm going to play for you now a work by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, which I think is much more forward-looking than the music of his father, music that anticipates the style of Haydn and other later 18th century classical composers.
If you have a joy, sorrow, or milestone that you'd like to share, I invite you to enter it into the chat. Wait for it. Now. As you do so, please make the first word be either joy, sorrow, or milestone, so that as I scan through the chat stream during the prayer, I can easily identify which messages are meant for me to say out loud. And as always, that part of the prayer where I speak what you've written in the chat will not be included when this service is posted later to YouTube. This morning's invocation words are from Amy Bowden Friedman. Once more, the earth has turned toward the light of the sun, and we are bathed in the light of a new day. So may we greet the dawning of fresh possibility. Once more, we awaken from our slumber, and as our bodies rise to meet the challenges and pleasures of living, so may our hearts and minds open with promise. Once more, we gather for worship as we join our voices in word and in song. So may this assembly bring forth wholeness. Come, let us worship. And now let us sing and affirm together the aspiration from We Would Be One.
mission of Community Unitarian Universalist Congregation is the covenant of this congregation. Would all the members and visitors who would like to affirm it along with me? We covenant to nurture each other in our spiritual journeys, foster compassion and understanding within and beyond our community, and engage in service to transform ourselves and our world. Perhaps like Jacob in the Bible, fashioning a multicolored coat for his favorite son Joseph, Johann Sebastian fashioned a number of keyboard compositions for his eldest son, Wilhelm Friedemann. This is one of those pieces. It's from a notebook of pieces he dedicated to Wilhelm Friedemann. It's meant to instruct beginners in the art of keyboard playing.
Jacob had 12 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin, and one daughter, Dinah. The 11th son, Joseph, was Jacob's favorite.
When Joseph was 17, one day, after shepherding the flock with his brothers, he brought back a bad report of his brothers to their father. So his brothers didn't like Joseph.
Jacob made for Joseph a long robe with sleeves, but when his brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than all his brothers, they felt bad and further disliked Joseph.
Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us?"
One day, when many of the brothers were tending flocks far from home, Jacob sent Joseph to see how things were going. From a distance, the brothers saw Joseph coming, and they made a plan to get Joseph out of their lives.
So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and took him and threw him into a pit.
Then they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming by. This gave them the idea to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites to be their slave, and that's what they did.
The Ishmaelites took Joseph to Egypt, where they resold him to Potiphar, Pharaoh's captain of the guard.
Joseph was a good thinker and planner and helped Potiphar prosper. Potiphar trusted Joseph to manage almost all his affairs.
Then one day, Potiphar's wife wanted Joseph to do something that Joseph knew Potiphar wouldn't want him to do. Joseph refused. Potiphar's wife told Potiphar a lie about Joseph, which caused Potiphar to have Joseph thrown in prison.
Joseph was so inherently helpful and talented that soon he had earned the complete trust of the chief jailer, who put Joseph in charge of managing the prison.
Joseph could interpret dreams. He gave such insightful interpretations of the dreams of some of the other prisoners that word even got back to Pharaoh about it.
So when Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams one night, he sent for the prisoner Joseph to interpret them. This was Pharaoh's dream. 7 fat cows were swallowed up by 7 thin cows. In the second dream, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were swallowed up by 7 ears thin and blighted.
Joseph told Pharaoh that the 7 fat cows and the 7 plump ears of grain represented 7 years of plenty, which would be swallowed up by 7 years of famine. What Pharaoh needs to do, said Joseph, is appoint supervisors to make sure the food is stored up during the good years to see Egypt through the lean years.
Pharaoh released Joseph from prison and appointed him the overseer of the preparations for the famine years. Suddenly, Joseph was very powerful and heaped with the riches corresponding to his station.
When the famine came, it affected all the surrounding areas, including Canaan, where Joseph's father, brothers, and sister were. When Jacob heard that Egypt had storehouses of grain, he sent his sons to Egypt to buy some.
When the brothers came before Joseph seeking food, they didn't recognize Joseph, though Joseph recognized them. When Joseph threatened to have Benjamin thrown into enslavement, Judah begged, "Let him go, take me instead."
Then Joseph, weeping, revealed himself to his brothers. He had them and their father Jacob moved to Egypt, where he ensured their survival throughout the famine.
The brothers finally came to Joseph to beg forgiveness for their crime. They offered themselves as his slaves. Joseph and all the brothers were crying.
Joseph said, "Do not be afraid. Even though you intended to do me harm, it has put me in position to preserve numerous people. I will provide for you and your little ones."
Hi, I'm Jeff Tomlinson. This year, we are asking the congregation to discuss the proposed 8th principle. The proposed principle states, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions." Today, I would like to focus on journeying towards. Our denomination has a checkered past when it comes to the goals of multiculturalism and anti-racism. We say that we recognize the inherent worth and dignity of each person and that we are committed to justice. Embracing the 8th principle calls on us to undertake a journeying toward something together, a journeying towards liberation from systems of racism and oppression that harms all of us, because we are truly interdependent, a journey toward a better love. Thank you.
Let us have a time of prayer. Dear power that is given to us to form community and to love, there are people in our lives that we care about more than we could say. We love and are loved. We are fed and sheltered and have access to music, art, books, modern technology for participating in worship services amidst pandemic. Our neighbors around the world are our siblings, howsoever different their customs, culture, and perspectives. And worldwide now, the 7-day average of new cases per day of COVID-19 has doubled in the last 7 weeks. The number of deaths worldwide from COVID-19 on November 4th surpassed the April peak of 7-day average of deaths per day and has continued climbing, setting a new record every day for the last 10 days now. And in the US, the 7-day average of new cases per day took just 3 weeks to double. The US death rate from COVID is beginning to climb, though thankfully more slowly than the rate of new cases so far. The daily deaths averaged over 1,100 a day in the last week. Hospitals are strained. Our thoughts go out to the frontline healthcare workers. We are deeply grateful for them. Our testing capacity has gotten much greater. Results return much sooner. Treatments have gotten better. Pfizer and BioNTech have announced a very promising success rate in their early phase 3 vaccine trials. But even if its promises are borne out, there will be no wide distribution until spring. We are barely 9 or 10 months into this pandemic, and we have not experienced a full-blown fall or winter season. And so, dear God of life and love, let us buckle up and lock ourselves down again, and let us do so with fresh vigilance. In the midst of these strains, dear power of community and of love, we are grateful for a completed election. May our elected officials serve all people, no matter who they are, where they came from, or who they voted for. We know that our country's divisions will not easily be softened. May we be agents of healing. Our thoughts today are also with the people of Ethiopia, where civil war unfolds again, and the nation's people are already spilling over borders for safety. May there be peace. We are grateful for the progress of peace in Armenia, as the Prime Minister there announced a peace agreement signed with Russia and Azerbaijan to end war. Thank you, peacemakers. Sharing with us today in the chat, Carol Mehta shares a joy, blessed to receive a painting from one of our food delivery clients. Also, from Ted and Karen Dreher, the sorrow that my dad, Ed Dreher, passed away on October 28th. He was a great dad and a great man. Ted writes, I love him with all my heart and will really miss him. And wanted to thank the congregation for all their support. And Carolyn Hansen writes, a sorrow. We lost 3 people over the past week. Sharon, our dear friend and neighbor, Sean, father of our son's friend, Rita, my husband's beloved grandmother. From Joe Majak, this sorrow, hitting the pause button for our annual family Thanksgiving gathering in White Plains. May our light drive out darkness. May our love drive out hate. And we ask of ourselves the mindful intention to delight in what is good, to confront what is cruel, to heal what is broken. Amen. I ask you now to observe 30 seconds of silence.
Calling all you hungry hearts, everywhere through endless time. You who wander, you who thirst, I offer you this heart of mine. Calling all you hungry spirits, all the lost your joy and your sorrow, I make it mine.
J.S. Bach's Sinfonia in E minor, another piece dedicated to his son Wilhelm Friedemann, a piece which describes the harmonious intertwining of three independent voices.
There is some inherent overlap between the aesthetic and the spiritual, between creativity and spirituality. Nevertheless, art is a spiritual practice, only if you make it a spiritual practice. Here's how Reverend Julianne Silberman describes her approach. Artwork is my daily spiritual practice. My goal is not to create masterpieces, but to get more closely in touch with my interior spiritual life. Buying new art supplies is a part of the spirituality of art. Buy supplies that excite you and that will work as a vehicle for your self-expression. Put your supplies out at a place where you spend a lot of time. Spirituality is not about separating myself from my life. It's about getting more deeply in touch with the sacred in my daily living. Don't try initially to create representational art. Rather, try to use color to express your feelings. Art as a spiritual discipline is the chosen need to find center. Finding center is vital to the meaning of your work. Others may expect to see your work. Creations that come out of an inner listening are intensely personal, as difficult to share as journal entries or personal prayers. There may come a time when you want to share, but start with the assumption that no one but you will ever see what you make. Artwork reconnects me with parts of myself that I had negated and devalued. It brings a sense of wholeness. Authenticity is the most important aspect of art as a spiritual practice. Listen to yourself. Use what you have, experiment, and eventually find what you like. Find yourself and let it out.
For the full post about art as a spiritual practice, please see the link in the eCommunitarian. And now, please sing along with the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore's choir, hymn number 323, Break Not the Circle.
Break not the circle of enabling love, where people grow forgiven and forgiving. Break not the circle, make it wider still, till it includes, embraces all the living. Come wonder at this love that comes to life, where words of freedom are with humor spoken, and people keep no score of wrong and guilt, but will that human bonds remain unbroken. Join then the movement of the love that frees, till people of whatever race or nation will truly be themselves and on their feet, see eye to eye with laughter and elation.
We are today retelling an old story, looking again at what it tells us about being human and being animal. Before I get into Joseph and his brothers, let me say that I think a lot about stories, how we need them, and what happens when we don't have them. Stories tell us who we are and make us who we are, individually and collectively. Shared stories make a people a people. I and me are made of narrative, as are we and us. In these polarized times where division rives the land, we don't have a shared story about who we are. And this contrasts sharply with the decade I was born in, the 1950s. The 1950s were in many ways an awful time. Jim Crow segregation and the racist attitudes that went with it were virulent. Gender oppression was stifling. LGBTQ folk largely stayed in the closet for their own safety. Anti-Semitism was worse then. And it was also, though, a time of cohesion. Very low income inequality, very low political polarization, tremendous levels of emotionally stable civic participation. Churches, PTAs, civic clubs, and bowling leagues had sky-high memberships. In the mid-1950s, 89% of the US population was whites. Today, the Census Bureau says 60% of the population is non-Hispanic whites, which is a big change. It's projected to fall below 50% before 2050. We had a story. It was, frankly, yes, a racist story. The history of humanity, as I learned it in grade school, was a mostly Western history of Europeans accumulating great ideas and innovations, from the Egyptians through Athens, Magna Carta, the Age of Faith, the Renaissance, the printing press, Western science, democracy, with a free press, an independent judiciary, and a Bill of Rights. In the rap battle of cultures, Europeans, it seemed, only needed to say Plato, Shakespeare, Newton, and drop the mic. The story, in the version it came down to me, did not ever say white people are genetically superior or are God's favorite, but the story also provided no other explanation for why these great ideas and innovations did not appear in pre-Columbian Americas, sub-Saharan Africa, or East Asia. We now have some available stories that do address how the dominance of Europeans came about, stories that elucidate both the willingness and the ability to cruelly subjugate the globe. That ability and willingness were products of particular conditions. Turns out these are rather complicated stories, and they aren't broadly or well known. A lot of the general populace clings to the old story. Among scholars who have looked most closely into the question, there's disagreement about how much weight is carried by each of the various conditions, and the folks that approve school textbooks are even further from consensus on a new story to tell. We definitely need to get rid of the past racist patriarchal story. The thing is, now we don't have a shared story, which means we don't know who we are as a people. And without that, the sense of belonging grows thin. We have more loneliness, more distrust, more isolation, alienation, depression, suicide. We need stories. I don't know if the people of the US will ever again have a unifying story that tells us who we are as a people. Yet we can tap into the vein of shared stories and keep them alive, even if they aren't the sorts that tell us who we are. And so we come to the story of Joseph, which ironically is a chapter in the origin myth of the Jewish people. It has been for millennia precisely a story telling a people who they were. And it has come to be a part of the cultural storehouse for Christians as well as Jews, for Black, Hispanic, and white Americans, and some indigenous folk. Less so for Asian Americans. They can learn this story just as non-Asians are picking up some Asian stories too in our multicultural culture. Perhaps you saw the latest Mulan movie. Telling and retelling stories from the Torah helps in the development and maintenance of a common narrative vocabulary. In this case, it's a story about what we might call the way of forgiveness. That's what Stephen Mitchell calls it in his imaginative retelling and expansion of the Joseph story, titled Joseph and the Way of Forgiveness. There are so many kinds and levels of forgiveness. You can say, I forgive you. You can say it and not mean it. You can say it and mean it, but still have not fully done it because a part of your heart continues to harbor resentment. Also, you can mean it, but never say it. Or neither say it nor mean it, but nevertheless let go of your grievance, release all the resentment. Felicia Sanders, the mother of one of the 9 victims killed by Dylan Roof in a Charleston church in 2015, told Roof, I forgive you. I have no reason to doubt that she meant it. I just know that there are some times when forgiveness hasn't actually happened just by saying it, even when it is meant. The way of forgiveness, though, isn't about the necessary and sufficient conditions for a single act or utterance to qualify as truly forgiving someone. The way of forgiveness is about a whole approach to life that isn't about blaming, that isn't about identifying specific wrongs and healing from them. That might sometimes be necessary. But Joseph never says, I forgive you. His own brothers were close to killing him. They sold him into slavery instead because by a fluke, the opportunity to do so happened to arise. Joseph would seem to have a lot that his brothers needed to forgive him for, but he sees life as working out for the best, as under a divine plan. All things happen as they should, so there's never a grudge, never a need for a specific process of releasing that grudge. How does that work? How does this story tell us something that we can not only share, but that will help our world make sense? I'll look into that in the next part. Adam?
Thank you, Meredith. Perhaps J.S. Bach wanted to teach his son Wilhelm Friedemann something about the divine potential of the simplest of ideas in the collection of two-part inventions he dedicated to him in 1720. In this first invention I'm going to play for you now, Bach seems to be telling his son everything that can be gotten out of 4 simple notes. The notes can be played ascending, they can be played descending skipping, they can be played upside down, they can be played slower. The invention exhausts everything latent in that one simple idea.
Some people say everything happens for a reason. It feels to them maybe like there's a divine plan. They say there are no coincidences. They like such sayings as everything works out in the end. If it hasn't worked out, it's not the end. I don't talk that way much. It seems to me to make just as much sense to say nothing works out in the end. If it seems to have worked out, it's not the end, which sounds like one of those corollaries of Murphy's Law. But what I really mean is just that there are no ends. Nothing, it's never the end. And there are coincidences. I don't think events are part of a divine plan, and while everything happens for causes, only some things happen for reasons, let alone a reason. But those who are drawn to speak that way, I think there's nevertheless pointing to something underlying that is important. In this world of grief, loss, and pain, there is a glory somehow shining through. In the midst of all the oppression and injustice, there is a fundamental rightness about life and this world. Wrong really is wrong, and it's also always in a wider context, a context within which everything is all right. Take, for example, predation. The fox hunts the rabbit, kills it, and eats it. There's an inherent tragedy here, painful death for the rabbit, or else painful starvation death for the fox. Every day, I vow to save all beings. How do I save both the fox and the rabbit? To save one is to doom the other, isn't it? At least one well-known ethicist, Martha Nussbaum, argues that we should provide textured vegetable protein, fake meat, to all the predators and perform enough vasectomies on prey animals that they don't overpopulate. Then prey and predator alike could peaceably live out their days. The lion could lie down with the lamb without either of them fearing. I have yet to meet anybody who agrees with Martha Nussbaum about this. Some years ago, trying to come to terms with this issue, I wrote this poem. It's titled Prayer to the Rabbit God. The rabbit god made bunnies as morning brightened into day. She gave them a green planet to eat, made them love to hump like rabbits and love their babies. Bunnies make bunnies faster than plants grow, she noticed. And so, as evening darkened into night, the rabbit god made foxes. Predation, she said, will give my lovelies sharp ears, beautiful speed, a touch of cleverness. Let them be grateful for the red fur death and the fear that makes them so alert. Thus the rabbit god became the fox god too. Bodies are made of nutrients, there being no other way to make them. There can't not be carnivores. So, dear God of hunter and of hunted, I too, a body made of food, pray to be eaten rather than outconsume providence, and to love the beauty of my fears. So that's me aiming to express the glory shining through the tragedy, pain, and death, and without complacently exempting myself from that tragedy. There is, we might say, a kind of intelligence in the cruelty with which natural selection shapes species and ecosystems. I say intelligence without meaning to suggest intention. Natural selection has no intention, no aim, no aforethought of where it's going. And yet, through the passing of eons, the arms race of predator and prey, that cooperative competition of pushing each other to ever more sophisticated abilities, it brings forth ever more wondrous and unpredictable beauty. The sharp eye of the hawk, the graceful speed of the gazelle, the rabbit's ear, the fox's nose, the turtle's shell, the porcupine's quills, the skunk's spray. It brings forth human bipedalism that makes us not as fast as our quadruped prey, but able to run longer distance, and our loss of body care so we can dissipate heat while our prey succumbs to heat exhaustion over a long chase. Who could have seen that coming? And it brings forth our big ultra-social brains that allow us not only amazing cleverness, but the capacity to share it and preserve it and build on each other's discoveries and strategies. All of this required massive, heartless cruelty to bring forth. Joseph's way is to think in terms of a divine plan. But I offer to you that that is but a rhetorical flourish for orienting toward the beauty of life inseparable from its harsh pain. Stephen Mitchell writes of the transformation that came over Joseph as he lay in that pit where his brothers had tossed him. The stone cistern where Joseph lay was the womb of his transformation. He had to descend to the depths of himself and stay there in that inner darkness, without refuge, without hope. That was the only path that could lead him upward. And then he had to find his way through a world of paradox, where exile is homecoming, slavery is freedom, and not knowing is the ultimate wisdom. No one, of course, wants to suffer. And yet the fortunate among us manage to learn from our suffering what can be learned nowhere else. We become clearly, joyously aware of the cause of all suffering. The remembered pain drips into the heart, and an understanding dawns on us, even against our will, that there is a violent grace that shapes our ends. Humility follows as a natural result. We learn how to lose control, to let go of control. We discover that we never had control in the first place. There's no humiliation or shame in any of this. It is total surrender to what is. You discover that you have let go into an intelligence that is incomparably vaster than yours. You stand in what's left of you. You die to self, and you keep on dying. It's like a tree that lets go of its leaves. The beautiful clothing has fallen away, and the tree just stands there in the cold of winter, totally exposed, totally surrendered. Adam?
Thank you, Meredith. The lion and the lamb, the fox and the rabbit. In his ninth invention, Bach seems to be telling us about the complementary existence of two musical ideas. It's a study in what might be called invertible counterpoint, in which two ideas work equally well, whichever one is on top, whichever one is on the bottom.
As Joseph lies in the pit in his rejection and suffering, the way of forgiveness comes over him. It begins not by forgiving those who wronged him. This does not occur to him. It begins with a prayer to be forgiven. Forgive me, he prayed silently, not to God, but to his brothers, though he knew this was absurd. There was no way out. There were no solutions. There was nothing to do, nothing to pray except, may your will be done. It's a prayer to let go of the ego's thoughts about what should be, to open fully and unreservedly to reality just as it is. Joseph finds a helpful device to personify this reality as God. Not what I want, he prays, but what you want. I'm not doing any of this, nor are my brothers. Whatever we think we are doing, we are all doing what is best in your sight. We're all doing your will, dear Lord, because we are all the work of your hands. Whether reality is personified in that way or not, the way of forgiveness is the ongoing recognition and re-recognition that control is an illusion. Yes, we have responsibilities and we must tend to them, but this is the narrower context of our lives. In the wider context, there is no control. This is the transformational awareness that it seems must have come over Joseph in the pit. And thus, when he is pulled out and sold to Ishmaelites, he does not speak up. He could have cried out against his brothers and with his considerable eloquence tried to move the Ishmaelites' hearts to take him home where his wealthy father would pay a large ransom, but he didn't utter a word. The lesson here for us isn't that we shouldn't speak up in our own defense and protest injustice. It's an invitation to feel our way into a more intuitive, receptive way of being. Joseph somehow intuited that what was happening was more, let's say, interesting than being released back to his father. He could not have said why he felt that way. Thus, Joseph comes to serve Potiphar for some years. He rises to a position of being in charge of Potiphar's affairs. He's falsely accused and thrown in prison. And yet again here, he does not speak up in his own defense. He counsels some people in prison, and does so shrewdly that at last Pharaoh seeks his counsel, his ability to see the sense in what doesn't seem to make sense. And this too is a feature of the way of forgiveness. It is the way of hope, not hope in the sense of a thing wished for, but hope as the understanding that things make sense however they turn out. Joseph is made the Pharaoh's viceroy, and his job is to plan for the future. Even as he spends his days in the complex calculations and strategies of food storage for a time of famine, he does so without a sense of rejection or resistance to what will come, but simply a sense of compassion for people that they be provided for and not come to starve. Even as he plans for a future, he is living in wonder of each present moment. And so the famine comes, and his brothers show up begging for food. And after testing them with certain devices, eventually he reveals himself to them. First, he has to prove he really is their brother Joseph. So he recounts to them their crime of throwing him in the pit and then selling him into slavery. It's not what he wants to dwell on, but it's something he would only know if he really were their brother Joseph, so that's why he mentions it. The next thing was to let these terrified men know that he had forgiven them, that he felt no anger or resentment, no residue from the event, that he was standing before them with an open heart. And actually, forgiveness was an inaccurate word for what he was experiencing, since it implies that a magnanimous I grants something to a not necessarily deserving you. And it wasn't like that at all. He wasn't granting anything or even doing anything. He realized that his brothers were guilty, but he also saw the innocence in that guilt. The way of forgiveness is distinct from discrete acts of forgiving, for the way of forgiveness is grounded in the realization that there is nothing to forgive. His brothers simply hadn't known what they were doing. And given the violence of their emotions, there was nothing else they could have done. He tells them, don't be troubled. Don't blame yourselves. He knows that this reassurance won't do much. His brothers would have to blame themselves. They wouldn't be able to see their own innocence until their minds slowed down enough to understand their crime within the greater scheme of things. And in the meantime, they would necessarily be grieved and angry at themselves. They would suffer needlessly from a remembered, that is, from an imagined past that they could neither retract nor change. And so Joseph speaks to his brothers in terms they might understand. He says, God sent me ahead of you to save lives. This is the language available for that time and culture for pointing to the illusion of control. The brothers never decided to hate the young Joseph's arrogance. They simply found that they did. There was never a point of conscious decision to resent the particular selectivity of their father's love. But resentment had arisen and had consumed them nonetheless. Ultimately, it was not they who had thrown Joseph into the pit or sold him to the Ishmaelites, but all the forces that made them into the sorts of human beings they were. The way of forgiveness is the way that never needs to perform specific acts of forgiving, for it is based on the awareness that everything is always already forgiven. Everything, even the most painful experience, turns out to be pure grace. The way of forgiveness is thus also the way of hope, the only way of hope, the way of being present to ineluctable wonder, beauty, mystery, and glory we cannot make and cannot mar. May it be so. Amen.
The closing hymn is 315, This Old World. Please sing along with Lisa Kristen Gee and Matt Gee of the First Unitarian Church of Chicago.
This old world is full of sorrow, full of sickness, weak and sore. If you love your neighbor truly, love will come to you the more. We're all children of one family. We're all brothers, sisters too. If you cherish one another, love and friendship come to you. This old world can be a garden full of fragrance, full of grace. If you love your neighbor truly, we must meet them face to face. It is said now, love thy neighbor, and we know well that is true. Is the sum of human labor true for me as well as you?
As we extinguish our chalice, may it glow in our hearts, renewing our spirits, joining us to the forces of life, and awakening us to transcendent wonder.
That there should be something rather than nothing, that we should exist at all,
That there should be others sharing with us this mysterious and beautiful thing, life.
The simple and amazing fact of existence is the invitation to constant wonder.
Dear ones, go in peace.
If you got troubles, then I've got 'em too. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for you. If we stick together, we can see it through.
coincidentally or not, the first surviving composition by Johann Sebastian Bach, written when he was still a teen, is a kind of domestic drama concerning his older brother, Johann Jakob. Apparently, the Capriccio on the departure of a beloved brother commemorates Bach's older brother's departure to serve as oboist in the army of the King of Sweden. And in the two sections I'm going to play for you now, Bach is depicting family friends gathering to bid him a fond farewell. And then you will hear a suggestion of him tootling his oboe as he serves as postilion.